guys, and welcome to day number 7 of my Inktober project. The prompt I'm using for today's illustration is Under the Surface, and this is the prompt that I picked at the end of the last video. The first thing that came to mind when I saw the prompt was actually underwater, not underground. I tried to do a couple of little thumbnails, but the more I tried to develop it, the more I realized that theme-wise it didn't really fit with the rest of my pieces, which wouldn't have been the end of the world, but I did decide to try a couple of different concepts out as well, and ultimately I decided that tree roots fit a lot better. Now, while I was working on this illustration, I actually realized something kind of interesting. And that is that I haven't really drawn a lot of people in this first week. I mostly find this interesting since that's mostly what I draw. I don't tend to do pieces where there are no people involved, because a big part of my process is trying to tell a story, and it's easier to tell a story when there are people in the drawings. I did make a few decisions along the way where I purposefully didn't include people, but for the most part this happened very naturally and without my having to force it, which I found kind of intriguing. However, as I was working on this piece and coming to that realization, I was also kind of missing drawing people, so you probably can expect to see some more humans or humanoid type figures making their way into these pieces in the near future. Now, something that I actually remembered to do with this piece that I mentioned a couple of days ago were some tonal thumbnails. You will see me do this at some point where I take a scrap of paper and draw out the general format of this illustration several times. And then I go in with some pit pens in different values and try to map out where I want my lights and darks to be. Ultimately, I am very happy that I decided to do this time around, primarily because the option I ended up going with was not the first one I put onto paper. The first idea, the first concept, wasn't terrible, but I liked the second option that I did better. And if I hadn't have done the thumbnails, I most likely would have gone with the first option, which may have led to my not liking the piece as much as I could have. In my personal experience, this is why thumbnails can be very helpful, and it is why a lot of artists promote them as a tool to getting your drawings to a place that you like. It allows you to look at a variety of different options without fully committing to any of them. It's definitely a massive time saver and allows you to evaluate options and pick the one that you think is best. And best of all, instead of doing multiple full versions of an illustration, you only have to spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes to do this. Now, looking a little bit more in depth at this illustration specifically, I do think that as the month continues to progress, I'm getting a little bit more comfortable with the medium. I think I may have mentioned in either the first or second video that when Inktober started, I was kind of out of practice with traditional art in the form of illustrations and things that were not mixed media. And I don't know that I had actually done an illustration fully in ink since last Inktober. I had definitely done watercolor ones, but fully ink, I think, was probably back in October of 2017. I think this comfort level is sort of illustrated in the use of new techniques. Back when I first started the month, when I was in the first couple of days, I wasn't really trying new things. I was pretty much just doing flat lays of color and then adding my shading on top of that, which I did do in this piece as well. But another thing I did with this piece in particular was kind of going off of yesterday's piece. I was kind of worried about the dirt section of this illustration. It was a rather large chunk of the piece that I was going to paint in a very light gray, and I was worried about it looking kind of dull or untextured, since that was kind of what had happened with yesterday's piece in the fact that the completely black background looked very bland. So in order to combat that before it actually happened, I decided to add some texture to this area by splattering the ink. I watered it down a fair amount, loaded my brush up, and then hit the brush against another paintbrush to create splatters. After I had put down that initial amount of ink, it was definitely looking a little bit too dark for my liking. I only wanted some subtle texture, and so I ended up blotting the majority of that ink back up with my paper towel. I did this in several layers, and ultimately I think it makes that section of the painting look more interesting than it would have otherwise. Additionally, I also find that the texture in the dirt section is kind of interesting because it feels like it is mirroring the stars on the top half of the image, which you will see me add in at the very end. Now, speaking of mirrored images, I do very much think that this piece is mirrored in a kind of flipped around thematic kind of way. It wasn't fully intentional, but I did have a few ideas that I altered in order to make it this way. Of course, the first element I think of as being mirrored is the texture, but another thematic element that feels very similar to me is the parallel of the skull and bones underneath the ground, in contrast to the mushrooms growing on the trunk of the tree. Both of them are kind of in a similar vein with the concept of decay and that style of thing. And it's not terribly obvious, but it is something subtle that I enjoy, and so I thought I would mention it. In a lot of ways, this piece is very different from the type of work that I typically do. As I mentioned before, while I was drawing this, I really felt like I missed drawing people, even though I know that the variance and just general differences are what is helping me grow. And because of this, I am very glad that I'm stretching myself, because I know that it's ultimately going to lead me to being able to create newer and more exciting things. However, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be drawing more people, because, as I mentioned, I miss it, and I can just sort of incorporate some of these other elements I'm learning and experimenting with into that. So, with week number 1 down, in both illustrations and videos, I'm very interested to see where the rest of this challenge goes. Some days have been easier than others, as most daily challenges seem to be, and I'm still hoping that I can figure out how to get everything running a bit more smoothly, since I have some deadlines that are sort of creeping up on me and I'm having a difficult time finding the time to complete them. But at any rate, with all of that being said, I am going to transition us into the last part of the video where I'm picking tomorrow's prompt. So here is my illustration for day number 7 of Inktober, and without beating around the bush for very long, I'm going to pull out the prompt hat and pick the prompt for tomorrow. Here's our hat, and let's go. And we'll go with this one. Tomorrow's prompt is moth. Now, I actually really like this prompt, although it is fairly open to interpretation. I haven't used any moths or butterflies or anything like that in my Inktober project so far this year, but I think it could be fun to incorporate in the future as well. So I like this little element. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. You can subscribe if you would like to continue following my Inktober journey, and be sure to check back very soon to see what I do with this prompt.